The voice in the old audio. I never thought I would hear that voice again. It started innocently enough while I was going through some old files on my old laptop. The device had been collecting dust for years, hidden in the back of a drawer. I wasn't sure why I even still had it, but something in me needed to go through it. There was a part of me that thought I might find some treasure, an old picture, a forgotten message. But then, I found it. A voice. My voice. And it wasn't just any recording. It was a confession. The file was named confession.01 with no further description, no date, no indication of what it was. My fingers hovered over the play button. I hesitated. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe fate, pushed me to click it. I wasn't prepared for what I would hear. The moment the audio played, I froze. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I recognized my own voice. But what I heard was not something I would ever say, at least not that I could remember.
The words were sharp, deliberate, detached. "I did it," the voice said. "It's done. No going back now. They'll never know. It's over." The chill that ran through me wasn't from the cold room I was sitting in. No, it was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, that travels up your spine, turning everything inside you to ice. I sat there, staring at the screen, the voice echoing in my head. My hands were trembling, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but I didn't stop the audio. I couldn't. I listened to the entire recording. It went on for several minutes, each word, each sentence, dug into my mind. But I couldn't place it. I couldn't remember recording it. I couldn't remember doing whatever it was I had done. And then, at the end of the recording, I heard it. A name, a place, a time. Details that sent a sharp jolt through my chest. I recognized them. I knew them. But the memory wouldn't come. I sat there, completely still, until the recording stopped.
The screen went black. What had I done? I had no answers, only more questions. And the voice still lingered in my head. After the recording ended, I stayed where I was for a long time, staring at the dark screen as if it might speak again. When I finally closed the laptop, the silence in the room felt heavier than before. Dense and oppressive, as though it had weight. I told myself it was nothing, an old project, a mistake, something taken out of context. But the lie didn't sit well. It never does. My life, at least on the surface, was quiet, predictable. I woke up at the same hour every morning, prepared the same coffee, followed the same route to work. People described me as calm, reserved, reliable. I rarely disagreed with anyone. I avoided conflict whenever possible. Silence had become my safest language. What no one noticed was how carefully everything was arranged. I kept my apartment almost empty. No framed photographs, no personal mementos. The walls were bare,
The shelves nearly blank. I told myself I preferred minimalism, but the truth was simpler. Objects invited memories, and memories made me uneasy, especially the ones I couldn't fully reach. There were gaps in my past I never questioned too deeply. Entire stretches of time blurred together, reduced to vague impressions rather than clear recollections. If someone asked about those years, I answered vaguely and changed the subject. I had learned, instinctively, where not to look. Sleep was another quiet battleground. I fell asleep easily, but I never felt rested. Most nights I woke up just before dawn with a racing heart and no memory of a dream, only a lingering sense of having run from something I could not see. The feeling followed me into the day, like a shadow just outside my field of vision. Since hearing the recording, that shadow felt closer. As I went about my routine over the next few days, small things began to bother me.
A colleague mentioned a place that made my stomach tighten. A date on a document stirred a wave of unease I couldn't explain. I caught myself pausing mid-thought, as if my mind were steering me away from something dangerous. I tried to remember more, I really did, but each attempt felt like pressing against a locked door from the inside. The harder I pushed, the more resistance I felt. Not pain exactly, but a dull pressure, a warning. Don't. That word echoed in my head more than once, though I couldn't say where it came from. The confession lingered with me constantly. I replayed fragments of it in my mind, especially the tone of my own voice, steady, controlled, certain. It frightened me more than the words themselves. Whoever recorded that audio knew exactly what he was saying, and he wasn't confused. At night, I found myself staring at the closed laptop on my desk, knowing the file was still there, waiting. I hadn't deleted it. I told myself it was because I needed answers. But deep down, I suspected the truth was more complicated. I had built this life on silence for a reason, and whatever I had buried didn't want to stay buried much longer. I told myself I wouldn't listen to it again. That promise lasted exactly one night. The next morning, I woke up with the same weight pressing against my chest, the same restless tension humming beneath my skin. I tried to distract myself, coffee, emails, meaningless tasks, but everything felt muffled, distant. My thoughts kept circling back to the laptop, to the file sitting quietly in its folders, unchanged and patient. By evening, resistance had turned into necessity. I opened the laptop with a familiarity that unsettled me, as if my hands remembered the motion better than my mind did. The device booted slowly, its soft mechanical hum filling the room. I navigated through folders I barely recognized, past old documents and half-forgotten files, until I found it again. Confession 01. Seeing the name a second time sent a small surge of nausea through me. I hesitated longer than before, fingers hovering above the trackpad. Part of me hoped the file would be corrupted, unreadable, anything that would excuse me from hearing it again. It wasn't. I pressed play. This time I listened more carefully. My voice was calm, unnervingly so. No trembling, no hesitation. The words were spoken with intention, measured and precise, as though I had rehearsed them. I described what I had done in careful terms, avoiding emotion but not detail. The language was clinical, almost detached, as if I were documenting an event rather than confessing to one. Then came the specifics. A name I knew too well, a location I had passed countless times without understanding why my pulse quickened there, a date that made my throat tighten as soon as I heard it. The room felt smaller with every sentence. I paused the recording halfway through, breathing hard, my palms slick with sweat. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen, pale, wide-eyed, unfamiliar. I didn't recognize the man looking back, but something about him felt uncomfortably close. When I resumed the audio, I noticed things I had missed before. The faint sound of my own breathing between sentences. A brief pause, just long enough to suggest doubt, or something worse, resolve hardening into certainty. Near the end, my voice lowered. "This is the only way," it said. "I can't live with it otherwise." Those words struck deeper than the rest, not because they explained anything, but because they implied something already decided, something irreversible. When the recording ended, I didn't move. I sat there long after the silence returned, the air heavy with unsaid truths. I realized then that the file wasn't just a record of the past. It was a message, not meant for the world, not meant for forgiveness. It was meant for me,
and for the first time since finding it,
I understood something with unsettling clarity. Whatever I had forgotten, I had once believed forgetting was necessary. The question was no longer what I had done, it was why I had chosen not to remember. After listening to the recording again, sleep became impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words replaying in my mind not as sentences, but as sensations. Pressure behind the eyes, a tightness in my throat, the faint echo of a place I couldn't see but somehow felt. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up, as if it remembered something my mind refused to touch. Over the next few days, fragments began to surface. They weren't memories in the traditional sense. There were no clear images, no complete scenes. Instead, there were flashes, disconnected and intrusive. The smell of metal, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground, a sharp pain in my wrist that appeared out of nowhere, only to vanish seconds later. Each fragment left me shaken, disoriented.
I tried to force clarity. I closed my eyes and focused, hoping concentration would stitch the pieces together. But the harder I tried, the more my thoughts scattered. My mind resisted, sliding away from the truth like water over glass. It wasn't forgetting out of weakness. It was forgetting with purpose. That realization frightened me more than the audio ever had. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, I would lose a few seconds. I'd find myself standing still, heart racing, unsure of what I had been thinking about. Other times, a sudden sound, a door closing too hard, a voice raised slightly, would send a jolt of panic through me. My reaction felt disproportionate, irrational, yet it was immediate, instinctive, as if something inside me recognized danger long before I consciously could. I began to wonder what kind of mind does this to itself. What kind of person makes a decision so drastic that erasing memory becomes preferable to living with it?
One evening, while washing my hands, I noticed how tightly I was gripping the sink. My knuckles were white, my breathing shallow. I had no idea when I'd started holding on so hard. I slowly loosened my grip, watching my reflection in the mirror. For a brief moment, something flickered in my eyes. Recognition, maybe, or fear. Then it was gone. I started writing things down, hoping to anchor myself. Thoughts, sensations, words that surfaced without explanation. The notebook filled quickly, but it offered no clarity. Instead, it revealed a pattern. Everything I avoided circled back to the same invisible center, the same unnamed event. The guilt was no longer abstract. It had weight, shape, direction. I realized then that the recording wasn't the cause of my unease. It was merely the crack in a wall that had already been straining. Whatever I had done was still alive inside me, influencing my choices, my fears, my need for silence. Memory hadn't disappeared. It had been locked away.
And locks, I was beginning to understand, exist for a reason: to keep something dangerous from getting out, or to keep someone trapped inside. At first, the changes were subtle enough to dismiss. A name mentioned in passing during a meeting made my chest tighten for no clear reason. I excused myself, went to the restroom, and waited for the sensation to fade. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, anything but what I was beginning to suspect. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me into the streets, into conversations, into the smallest details of my days. A street sign I passed every morning suddenly felt charged with meaning. I slowed my steps without understanding why, my pulse quickening as I looked at a place I had never visited, at least not that I remembered. Still, my body reacted as if it knew the way. The worst part was how ordinary it all seemed to everyone else. I began to notice patterns. Dates repeated themselves with unsettling frequency. A song played in a cafe stirred a wave of nausea so strong I had to leave.
Even silence became threatening. In the absence of noise, my thoughts grew louder, more insistent, circling around something just beyond reach. I tried to resist. I told myself that memory is unreliable, that the mind fills gaps with invention. But deep down, I knew this wasn't imagination. It was recognition without context, knowledge stripped of narrative. The guilt sharpened. It no longer felt like a vague unease, but a presence, watching and waiting. I started to feel exposed, as though the world around me knew something I didn't. When strangers glanced in my direction, I wondered if they could see it on my face, if they could tell. At night, the whispers grew stronger. I dreamed without images, only sensations, pressure, weight, a sense of urgency. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, the echo of a thought still clinging to me. You knew what you were doing. One evening,
As I sorted through old emails, searching for anything that might ground me, I found references to people I couldn't place, conversations that ended abruptly, apologies without explanations. Each discovery tightened the knot inside my chest. This wasn't just about what I had done, it was about how carefully the aftermath had been erased. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that my life had been shaped around avoidance. I had chosen routines that required no reflection, relationships that demanded no depth, a version of myself built to function, not to feel. The whispers were no longer faint. They pressed in from all sides, forcing my attention back to the center of everything I had been avoiding. I began to understand that the past wasn't returning randomly, it was responding to my proximity. The closer I got, the louder it became. I stood one night in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by silence, and felt something shift. Not a memory, a decision. I had done this to myself. The structure of my life, the gaps in my past, the unnatural calm I maintained, it all pointed to a single, deliberate act. I hadn't simply forgotten. I had made sure I wouldn't remember. That realization settled over me with terrifying clarity. The whispers quieted, replaced by something heavier, inevitability. If forgetting had been a choice, then remembering was only a matter of time, and time, I sensed, was running out. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a door opening just wide enough to let the truth seep through without revealing everything behind it. I began to remember the fear first. Not the event itself, but the aftermath, the suffocating weight of knowing I could not undo what had been done. I remembered sitting alone in a room much like the one I was in now, hands shaking, thoughts racing in circles that led nowhere but back to the same conclusion. I could not live with this. The memory was incomplete.
But the emotion was unmistakable. I remembered searching for solutions that weren't really solutions, rationalizations, bargains, promises to myself that never lasted more than a few minutes. Sleep had abandoned me then, just as it had now. Every waking moment had been consumed by the same question. How do you continue living when your own mind turns against you? That was when the idea surfaced. It didn't feel desperate at the time. It felt practical, controlled, almost merciful. I remembered reading about memory suppression, about the mind's ability to bury trauma so deeply it becomes unreachable. Therapy sessions followed, long conversations filled with carefully chosen words, spoken around the truth without naming it directly. I had learned how fragile memory was, how easily it could be reshaped or redirected. I hadn't erased everything. I had targeted it. The memory returned in fragments, signing forms I barely read, nodding at explanations that blurred together.
Agreeing to procedures meant to reduce emotional association. I remembered the calm professionalism of the people who helped me, their insistence that forgetting was not the same as being absolved. At the time, I hadn't cared. All I wanted was silence. The recording made sense now. I had left it behind as an anchor, a final act of honesty before surrendering my awareness. I had needed proof that the truth existed, even if I couldn't carry it anymore.
The audio wasn't an accident or a lapse in judgment. It was a safeguard. I sat at my desk, the weight of that understanding pressing down on me. Forgetting hadn't been a failure of memory. It had been an act of will, a controlled collapse designed to preserve something resembling a future. But the cost was becoming clear. Without the memory, the guilt had no direction. It seeped into everything, coloring my reactions, shaping my fears, dictating my need for isolation. I had escaped the image of what I'd done,
but not its consequence. I realized then that the version of me who made that decision had known this would happen. He had understood that forgetting would not bring peace, only distance. He had accepted the trade. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, feeling the truth settle into place. The decision to forget hadn't saved me. It had only delayed the moment when I would have to face myself again. And now, standing on the edge of what I had erased, I sensed that the final barrier was thinning. The silence I had once begged for was breaking apart, and beneath it waited the one thing I could no longer avoid. The truth I had been protecting myself from. I avoided the last part of the recording for as long as I could. Not because I didn't know it was there, but because I sensed what it contained. The file length had always bothered me. I remembered stopping it early before, convincing myself I had already heard enough. Now I understood why.
Some truths announce themselves before they are spoken. That night, I sat in the dark with the laptop open, the only light coming from the screen. My hands were steady as I pressed play, but my breathing betrayed me. The audio resumed at a point I didn't remember hearing before. There was a pause, longer than any other in the recording. Then my voice returned, lower, quieter, stripped of its earlier certainty. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "then it worked." The words landed heavily, as though they had been waiting for me all along. "I don't know what you remember now," the voice continued, "or what version of this you've managed to become. But if you're listening, it means you chose to forget. And I need you to understand why." I felt my throat tighten. The voice spoke directly to me. Not to the world, not to an authority or a confessor, but to the person I would become. It explained what I already suspected, that forgetting was never meant to erase guilt, only to make survival possible. "You didn't do this to be innocent," the voice said. "You did it so you could keep living." There was a faint sound in the background then, a breath, a shift in posture. I could hear the weight of the moment pressing down on the version of myself who had recorded it. "I know you'll want answers," the voice went on. "Details, images, but you don't need them. You already know what matters." Another pause. "You knew what you were doing." My chest tightened painfully. The words echoed long after they were spoken, filling the silence between sentences. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was resigned, certain. "I'm leaving this here so you won't lie to yourself forever," it concluded. "Not remembering is the mercy. Remembering is the sentence." The recording ended abruptly. I sat there, frozen, the room impossibly quiet. There was no revelation of facts, no dramatic confession of the act itself, and yet I felt more exposed than I ever had.
The message had done exactly what it was meant to do. It hadn't told me what I did. It had told me who I was. And in that moment, I understood something with devastating clarity. The punishment I feared had never been external.
There would be no confrontation, no trial, no absolution. The reckoning had been waiting inside me all along. I deleted the recording the next morning. Not in a rush, not with hesitation. I watched the progress bar fill slowly, felt no relief when the file finally disappeared. The absence of it changed nothing. The voice was no longer stored on a device. It lived where it always had, inside me. The apartment felt different after that, quieter, but not peaceful, the kind of silence that follows a confession no one else hears. I moved through my routine with the same precision as before, yet something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer waiting to remember. I understood now that memory was never the point. Whatever I had done existed beyond images or details. It existed in my restraint, in my isolation, in the